The crash of breaking glass echoed through the mansion's silent halls. Eleanor froze in the doorway of the study, her hand still on the doorknob, as she watched the old man in the wheelchair swipe another crystal tumbler off his desk. "Get out!" William Morgan roared, his lined face flushed with anger. "Get out and tell that agency I don't need another nurse trying to fix me." Eleanor Miller didn't move. After 3 bus transfers and a mile-long walk in the rain to reach Oakwood Manor, she wasn't about to turn around because of a temper tantrum, even from a millionaire. "I'm not a nurse, Mr. Morgan," she said, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her. "I'm a cook, and judging by the smell in here, you could use one. Get ready. You think you know where this story is going. But trust me, you don't. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel." The old man's bushy white eyebrows shot up in surprise. For the first time, he looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her rain-soaked jacket, the worn duffel bag over her shoulder, and the battered case she clutched in her other hand. "A cook?" William scoffed, wheeling himself back behind his desk. "Martha didn't say anything about a cook. I don't need a cook. I need to be left alone." Eleanor set her bag down and shrugged off her wet jacket. At 45, she'd spent enough years in restaurant kitchens not to be intimidated by angry men with loud voices. "Your regular housekeeper had a heart attack, Mr. Morgan. I'm all they could find on short notice." She took a step forward, grimacing at the plates of half-eaten food scattered around the room. Some looked days old. "And with respect, sir, you clearly do need a cook." William's face darkened again. "James had a heart attack?" Something vulnerable flickered across his features before the scowl returned. "Nobody tells me anything anymore. James is stable, but he'll be in the hospital for a while," Eleanor explained, her voice softening slightly. She glanced around the grand study with its towering bookshelves and magnificent view of the stormy Maine coastline. "In the meantime, I'm here to help. The agency said you needed emergency coverage." "I don't need—" "Everyone needs to eat, Mr. Morgan," Eleanor interrupted, picking up a plate with something unrecognizable growing on it. "Even stubborn millionaires." For a moment, William looked like he might explode again. Then, unexpectedly, a dry chuckle escaped him. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that." He wheeled himself to the window, staring out at the rain lashing against the glass. "Fine. You can stay until James returns. The kitchen's downstairs. I assume you can find it yourself." Eleanor nodded, gathering more dirty dishes. "I'll bring you dinner in an hour." "Don't bother," William muttered. "I'm not hungry." "Wasn't asking, sir," Eleanor replied, heading for the door with her arms full of plates. "And I'll need the key to the pantry." William gestured vaguely toward a drawer in his desk. "Top right. Take whatever you need, then leave me in peace." As Eleanor retrieved the key, she noticed the photograph on William's desk, a striking woman with dark hair and warm eyes, laughing beside a younger, standing version of William on what appeared to be a sailboat. The glass over the photo was spotlessly clean, unlike everything else in the room. "Your wife?" she asked before she could stop herself. William's head snapped around, eyes flashing with sudden fury. "That's none of your business. Get out. Now." Eleanor retreated quickly, but not before noticing the collection of prescription bottles lined up on a side table and the folded blanket that suggested William often slept in his wheelchair rather than making the journey to a proper bed. The kitchen was enormous and, surprisingly, immaculate, clearly unused rather than clean. Eleanor set down her case of personal knives on the marble countertop and began exploring. The pantry was well stocked with canned goods and staples, though most items looked like they'd been there for years. The refrigerator contained mostly liquids, milk, juice, and several bottles of expensive whiskey. After taking inventory, Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She found a package of frozen fish in the freezer, likely dropped off by the agency before her arrival. Working quickly, she prepared a simple fish soup, something warming and nourishing for a stormy evening. As the aroma filled the kitchen, Eleanor's mind drifted to the man upstairs. The agency had briefed her on the basics. William Morgan, 68. Widowed, wheelchair-bound due to a degenerative condition, wealthy from his shipping company but living like a hermit since his wife's death 15 years ago. The house manager, James, had been his only regular companion for the past decade, and now even James was gone. Eleanor stirred the soup slowly. She hadn't told the agency everything about herself, just enough to get the job. They didn't need to know about the restaurant she'd lost in the divorce, or the nights she'd spent in her car before finding a cheap room to rent, or how desperate she was for this temporary position to become permanent. When the soup was ready, Eleanor ladled it into a bowl, placed it on a tray with some fresh bread, and headed back upstairs. The study door was closed. She knocked twice. "Go away," came the gruff response. Eleanor pushed the door open anyway, balancing the tray on her hip. "Dinner, Mr. Morgan." The room was darker now, lit only by a single lamp. William sat in the same position by the window, though the storm outside had intensified, turning the view into sheets of gray rain punctuated by flashes of lightning. "I told you I wasn't hungry," he said, not turning around. "And I told you I wasn't asking." Eleanor set the tray on a small table beside him. "It's fish soup, simple but good." William glanced at the bowl, then back at the window. "I haven't had fish soup since Sarah." His voice trailed off. Eleanor waited, but he didn't continue. "Your wife?" she guessed quietly. This time, William didn't snap at her. He just nodded, the fight seemingly drained from him. She loved to cook, especially on days like this. Another flash of lightning illuminated his face, and Eleanor was struck by the naked grief she saw there. Not old and faded as she would have expected after 15 years, but raw and present. "Try it," she encouraged gently. "Food always tastes better during a storm." To her surprise, William reached for the spoon. He took a small taste, then another. "It's different from hers, but good." Eleanor smiled. "Thank you. I'll take that as high praise." William ate slowly but steadily, each spoonful seeming to require conscious effort, as though he'd forgotten how to enjoy food. Eleanor moved around the room, straightening books and gathering glasses, giving him space while remaining present. "How long have you been cooking?" William asked suddenly. "My whole life," Eleanor answered, surprised by the question. "Professionally for 25 years. And now you're here, serving soup to an old man who can't even walk to his own dining room." There was bitterness in his voice, but curiosity too. Eleanor shrugged. "Life takes unexpected turns. I had my own restaurant once." "What happened?" "My ex-husband happened," she said simply. "He got the restaurant in the divorce. I got freedom. Some days I'm not sure who got the better deal." William's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Freedom's overrated when you can't walk out the front door." "Doors work both ways, Mr. Morgan," Eleanor replied. "They keep people out, but they also keep people in." The lights flickered as another crack of thunder shook the house. William flinched, his hand jerking and sending the spoon clattering to the floor. "Damn it," he muttered, his face flushing with embarrassment as he tried unsuccessfully to reach for it. Eleanor retrieved the spoon calmly, placing a clean one on his tray. "The storm's getting worse. Does the power go out often here?" William nodded, his jaw tight with what Eleanor recognized as pain rather than anger. "Generator should kick in if it does. There are candles in the drawer if you need them." "Are you in pain, Mr. Morgan?" she asked directly. His eyes flashed. "I'm always in pain. Part of the package deal with this condition." "Your medication doesn't do much anymore," he interrupted. "Nothing does." Eleanor noticed his hands trembling slightly. "When did you last take it?" "This morning, maybe, I don't remember." Without asking permission, Eleanor went to the side table and examined the prescription bottles. "You should have taken this one 3 hours ago," she said, reading the label. William shrugged. "What's the point? It just dulls things for a while." "The point," Eleanor said firmly, filling a glass with water from a pitcher, "is that pain management is cumulative. Skip doses and you're always playing catch-up." She handed him the pill and the water. "Take it." To her surprise, he did, swallowing it without further argument. "You sound like you know something about it," he observed. Eleanor's hand unconsciously moved to her lower back. "Car accident, 10 years ago. Nothing like what you're dealing with, but enough to teach me about pain management." William studied her with new interest. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Some nervous young girl who'd run out screaming after my first tantrum," he admitted. Eleanor laughed softly. "I raised 3 kids and ran a restaurant kitchen. It takes more than a grumpy old man to scare me off." The lights flickered again and went out completely. A moment later, the soft hum of the generator filled the silence as emergency lights came on in the hallway. "Looks like we're in for a long night," Eleanor said, lighting candles around the room. "Would you like me to help you to your bedroom?" William's face closed off immediately. "No, I sleep here." Eleanor nodded, not pushing. "Then I'll bring you some fresh blankets before I turn in." She collected his empty bowl. "Anything else you need tonight?" William hesitated, then shook his head. "No, thank you for the soup." It wasn't much, but Eleanor recognized it as the peace offering it was. "You're welcome, Mr. Morgan. I'll see you in the morning." As she turned to leave, William spoke again. "Eleanor, was it?" "Yes." "You can call me Will. Mr. Morgan makes me feel like my father." Eleanor smiled. "Good night, Will. Try to get some rest." As she closed the door behind her, Eleanor leaned against it for a moment, listening to the rain and thunder outside. She'd come to Oakwood Manor desperate for work, expecting an easy job caring for a difficult old man. What she hadn't expected was the strange connection she'd felt when Will had finally met her eyes. The recognition of someone else who'd lost nearly everything and was barely hanging on. Eleanor straightened up and headed toward the kitchen. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make blueberry pancakes. Sarah's favorite, perhaps? It seemed worth finding out. Morning sunlight streamed through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Eleanor pulled back heavy curtains in the main hallway, sending dust motes dancing in the golden beams. After the storm had passed overnight, the main coastline sparkled below Oakwood Manor, the ocean a brilliant blue against rocky shores. "What are you doing?" Will's voice came from behind her, making Eleanor turn. He sat in his wheelchair at the end of the hall, still in yesterday's clothes, his white hair uncombed. "Good morning to you too," Eleanor said cheerfully. "I'm letting some light in. This place feels like a cave." Will frowned. "I like it that way." "Well, your plants don't," Eleanor replied, pointing to a dying fern in the corner. "Living things need sunlight, Will, even grumpy old men." "I'm not—" Will started to protest, then shook his head. "Are those pancakes I smell?" Eleanor smiled. "Blueberry pancakes. They're waiting for you in the dining room." "I told you, I eat in my study." "And I decided that's a terrible habit," Eleanor said, walking toward him. "You've got a beautiful dining room with a view of the ocean. Seems a shame to waste it." Will's eyebrows drew together. "You decided? Last I checked, this was still my house." "Technically, yes," Eleanor agreed. "But since you hired me to cook, I get to decide where my food is best enjoyed." She moved behind his wheelchair. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Will nodded, and Eleanor began pushing him toward the dining room. She could feel the tension in his shoulders through the handles of the chair. "When was the last time you used this room?" she asked as they entered the spacious dining area. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating a long mahogany table set for one at the end nearest the view. Will was quiet for a moment. "Not since Sarah's last birthday, 15 years ago." Eleanor positioned his wheelchair at the head of the table where she'd set his place. A stack of blueberry pancakes steamed on the plate, alongside fresh coffee and orange juice. 15 years is a long time to avoid a room in your own house, she said gently. Will stared at the plate, then out at the view. "We used to have breakfast here every morning, Sarah loved watching the lobster boats head out. Eleanor sat in the chair adjacent to him. "Tell me about her." Will looked surprised by the request. "Why would you care?" "Because she was important to you," Eleanor said simply. "And because the pancakes are getting cold." That earned her a small smile. Will picked up his fork and cut into the stack of pancakes. When he took the first bite, his eyes widened slightly. "These are good," he admitted. "Don't sound so surprised," Eleanor laughed. "I told you I was a cook." Will took another bite, then another. "Sarah used wild blueberries in hers. Said they had more flavor." "She was right," Eleanor agreed. "Unfortunately, I had to work with what was in your freezer. Next time I go shopping, I'll look for wild ones." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the clink of silverware and the distant calls of seagulls through the open window. "She was an artist," Will said suddenly. "Sarah. She painted mostly. Seascapes, local people, that sort of thing. But she could make anything beautiful." He gestured vaguely with his fork. "This house was falling apart when we bought it 30 years ago. She transformed it." Eleanor looked around the dining room, noticing the hand-painted details on the crown molding, the carefully restored woodwork. She had a good eye. "The best," Will agreed, his voice softening. "She had a studio on the 3rd floor, north-facing windows for the light." "Is it still there?" Eleanor asked. Will's expression closed off immediately. "It's locked. Has been since she died." "I see," Eleanor said, not pushing further. She stood and began clearing the plates. "What would you like to do today?" Will looked at her blankly. "Do?" "Yes, do. It's a nice day. We could sit on the porch, or I could push you around the gardens. They need attention, but they're still lovely." "I don't do things anymore," Will said flatly. "I exist. There's a difference." Eleanor put her hands on her hips. "That sounds boring." "It is," Will admitted with surprising honesty. "But it's safer that way." Before Eleanor could respond, the doorbell rang, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the house. Will frowned. Who could that be? Nobody comes here except the grocery delivery on Thursdays. "I'll check," Eleanor said, heading for the front door. She opened it to find a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit standing on the porch. He looked to be in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and features that reminded her immediately of Will. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man looked surprised to see her. "I'm looking for William Morgan. I'm his son, Michael." Eleanor blinked. "Will didn't mention he had a son." A shadow crossed Michael's face. "I'm not surprised. We haven't spoken in 12 years. May I come in?" Eleanor stepped aside, letting him enter. "He's in the dining room." Michael looked even more surprised at this. "The dining room? Dad never uses the dining room." "He does now," Eleanor said simply, leading the way. When they entered, Will was staring out the window, his back to the door. "Who was it?" he asked without turning. "Hello, Dad," Michael said. Will's whole body stiffened. Slowly, he turned his wheelchair to face his son. "Michael." His voice was carefully neutral, giving away nothing. "What brings you all the way from New York?" "James called me from the hospital," Michael explained. "He was worried about you being alone." Will's eyes flicked to Eleanor, then back to his son. "As you can see, I'm not alone." Michael extended his hand to Eleanor. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Michael Morgan." "Eleanor Miller," she replied, shaking his hand. "I'm filling in while James recovers." "You're from the agency?" Michael asked. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "I'm a cook, not a nurse, but I'm helping Mr. Morgan with whatever he needs." Michael nodded, turning back to his father. "Can we talk, Dad? Privately?" Will looked like he might refuse, but then nodded curtly. "My study." "I'll leave you two alone," Eleanor said. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." As she left, she heard Michael's voice, low and concerned. "Dad, Do you know anything about this woman? James said the agency sent someone named Patricia. In the kitchen, Eleanor busied herself preparing lunch and trying not to wonder about the conversation happening upstairs. The relationship between Will and his son was clearly complicated, and not her business. Still, after an hour had passed with no sound from the study, she began to worry. Will hadn't taken his mid-morning medication. Deciding this was reason enough to interrupt, Eleanor prepared a tray with water, Will's pills, and some fresh coffee. As she approached the study, she heard raised voices. "Can't stay in this mausoleum forever," Michael was saying. "It's been 15 years, Dad. Mom wouldn't want this for you." "Don't tell me what Sarah would want," Will shot back, his voice tight with anger. "You barely knew her. You were too busy building your precious career to visit, even when she was sick." "That's not fair, and you know it," Michael replied, his tone defensive. "I came as soon as I got your call. It's not my fault." "Not your fault?" Will's voice rose. "You were her son. You should have been here." Eleanor hesitated outside the door, uncomfortable about eavesdropping but concerned about Will's increasing agitation. When she heard the sound of something being knocked over, she knocked firmly on the door. "Will, I have your medication," she called. There was a moment of silence, then Will's strained voice. "Come in." Eleanor entered to find the study in disarray. Books had been swept from the desk, and a lamp lay broken on the floor. Michael stood by the window, his face flushed with emotion, while Will sat behind his desk, looking pale and exhausted. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Eleanor said calmly, setting the tray on the desk. "But it's time for your medication, Will." Will nodded, not meeting her eyes. He took the pills without complaint, swallowing them with a gulp of water. Michael watched this interaction with surprise. "You've got him taking his medication on schedule?" James said that was always a battle. Eleanor shrugged. "No battle necessary. Will and I have an understanding." She began picking up the fallen books, setting them carefully on the desk. Will's eyes followed her movements. "Leave them, Eleanor. I'll deal with it later." "We both know you won't," she replied without heat, continuing to straighten the room. When she reached for the broken lamp, Will sighed. "That was Sarah's," he said quietly. "One of her pottery pieces?" Eleanor examined the lamp base. "It's just cracked, not shattered. It can be repaired." "Not everything can," Will muttered with a pointed look at his son. Michael ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Dad, I didn't come here to fight. I came because I'm worried about you. The company lawyers called me. You haven't signed the quarterly reports, you've missed board meetings." "I founded that company," Will interrupted. "I ran it for 40 years. I think I've earned the right to step back." "Step back, yes," Michael agreed. "Abandon it completely? That's another matter." Eleanor finished picking up the books and turned to leave. "I'll start lunch. Will you be staying, Mr. Morgan?" Michael hesitated, looking at his father. "If I'm welcome." Will didn't answer immediately, then gave a short nod. "Stay. We're not finished talking." "I'll set an extra place," Eleanor said, heading for the door. "Thank you, Eleanor," Will called after her, his voice softer than it had been with his son. In the kitchen, Eleanor prepared a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches, wondering about the complicated history between father and son. The tension between them was palpable, yet, beneath the anger, she sensed a deep, unresolved grief on both sides. While the soup simmered, Eleanor found herself wandering through the ground floor of the mansion. The house was beautiful but neglected, with dust covers over furniture in rooms that clearly hadn't been used in years. It felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had stopped 15 years ago. In the main hallway, Eleanor paused before a large painting, a vibrant seascape with sunlight breaking through storm clouds over the very coastline visible from the house's windows. In the corner was a delicate signature. Sarah Morgan. "She was talented," Michael's voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned to find Will's son studying the painting with a complex expression. "Will told me she was an artist," Eleanor said. Michael nodded. She was extraordinary. This house used to be filled with life when she was alive. Dinner parties, art shows, charity events. Dad was different then, too. Laughed more. He shook his head. After she died, it was like he decided to die with her, just more slowly. People grieve in different ways, Eleanor said carefully. Grief is one thing, Michael replied. This is something else. It's like he's punishing himself. He turned to face her fully. How did you end up here, Ms. Miller? James said the agency was sending a nurse. They couldn't find one on short notice, Eleanor explained. I was available. Michael studied her face. And you're just a cook? No medical training? Eleanor bristled slightly at his tone. Just a cook with 30 years of experience, yes. Is that a problem? No, Michael said, backing down. It's just unusual. Dad doesn't exactly warm up to new people easily. I noticed, Eleanor said dryly. The soup's probably ready. We should head back. As they walked toward the kitchen, Michael asked, Has he shown you around the whole house? No, just the areas he uses, which aren't many. Michael nodded thoughtfully. There's a lot of history in this place. Some of it good, some not so good. He paused at the bottom of the grand staircase. His condition isn't just physical, you know. The doctors say depression has accelerated his decline. I'm not surprised, Eleanor replied. 15 years is a long time to sit alone in the dark. Too long, Michael agreed quietly. Far too long. When they reached the kitchen, Will was already there, having wheeled himself in while they were talking. Enjoying your tour? He asked, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what they'd been discussing. Just admiring Sarah's painting, Eleanor said honestly. You didn't tell me she was so talented. Something flickered in Will's eyes, pride, perhaps, or nostalgia. She was better than talented. She had vision. She could see beauty where no one else could. He looked directly at his son. Even in a broken-down old shipping magnate with a bad temper. Michael's expression softened. She saw the best in everyone, Dad, including me. For a moment, father and son looked at each other without the barrier of years of hurt between them. Then Will cleared his throat and the moment passed. Is lunch ready? He asked Eleanor. I find I'm actually hungry today. Eleanor smiled. It's ready, and we're eating in the dining room again. Will raised an eyebrow, but didn't protest. As Eleanor served the soup, she noticed him watching his son with a mixture of resentment and longing that spoke of a relationship too important to abandon, but too damaged to easily repair. Maybe, Eleanor thought, there was hope for Will Morgan yet. 3 weeks after Eleanor's arrival at Oakwood Manor, the house had begun to change. Dusty furniture covers were removed, windows gleamed in the sunlight, and fresh flowers appeared in vases throughout the first floor. The scent of home-cooked meals regularly drifted through rooms that had been silent for years. Will, too, was changing, subtly, reluctantly, but unmistakably. His meals were now taken in the dining room, and in the afternoons, Eleanor would wheel him onto the wide porch where they would sit together, watching the ocean and talking. Some days he said little. Other days, stories about Sarah and their life together flowed more freely. Eleanor was in the kitchen making bread when she heard the front door open. Hello? Michael's voice called out. Dad? Eleanor? In the kitchen, Eleanor called back, wiping flour from her hands. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking more casual than on his previous visit in jeans and a sweater instead of a suit. Something smells amazing. Sourdough bread, Eleanor explained. Your father mentioned it was Sarah's specialty, so I thought I'd try my hand at it. Michael smiled, setting his briefcase on the counter. Mom made the best sourdough in Maine. Dad used to joke that it was why he married her. He looked around. Where is he? Napping. The physical therapist was here this morning and the sessions tire him out. Eleanor gestured to the coffee pot. Would you like some? It's fresh. Physical therapist? Michael asked, accepting the cup she offered. Dad's seeing a physical therapist now? Eleanor nodded. Twice a week. It was his idea, actually. Said if he was going to keep eating my cooking, he'd better work on his strength. Michael looked genuinely surprised. That doesn't sound like my father at all. People can change, Eleanor said simply, returning to her bread dough. Even stubborn old men. I've been trying to get him to restart physical therapy for years, Michael said, shaking his head in wonder. What's your secret? Eleanor smiled. No secret. I just don't give him the option of giving up. She punched down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. And I don't treat him like he's made of glass. Michael watched her work for a moment. You care about him, he observed. Of course I do. He's a good man underneath all that gruffness. Eleanor shaped the dough into a loaf. He just forgot that for a while. I've been doing some thinking since my last visit, Michael said, his tone growing more serious. About Dad, this house, everything. He sipped his coffee. I spoke with his doctors in Portland. They say his physical decline doesn't match what they would expect from his condition alone. Eleanor nodded. It's the isolation, the giving up. I've seen it before. My grandfather was the same way after my grandmother died. It's like they decide there's no point in fighting anymore. Exactly, Michael agreed. But now that you're here... He hesitated. I haven't seen him this engaged in years. James noticed it too when I visited him at the hospital. I'm glad I could help, Eleanor said, feeling uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But I'm just a temporary solution while James recovers. Michael set down his coffee cup. What if it wasn't temporary? Eleanor looked up sharply. What do you mean? James is considering retirement. After his heart attack, his doctors are recommending a less demanding position. Michael leaned forward. I'd like to offer you a permanent job here, Eleanor, as head of household. Eleanor's hands stilled on the bread dough. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Michael urged. You've done more for my father in 3 weeks than anyone has in years. I need to think about it, Eleanor said carefully. And you should discuss this with Will first. It's his house, his life. I will, Michael promised. But I wanted to know if you'd be interested before I brought it up with him. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard the sound of Will's wheelchair in the hallway. Eleanor, he called. Is Michael here? I thought I heard his voice. In the kitchen, Dad, Michael called back. Will appeared in the doorway, looking better rested than he had in days. His white hair was combed, and he wore a fresh shirt that Eleanor had laid out for him. You didn't tell me Michael was coming today, Will said to Eleanor, though his tone held no accusation. I didn't know, she replied honestly. It's a nice surprise. Will eyed the briefcase on the counter. Business or pleasure? He asked his son. A bit of both, Michael admitted. I have some company papers that need your signature, but I also wanted to see how you were doing. He looked his father over with approval. You look good, Dad. Better than last time. Will shrugged, but Eleanor could see he was pleased by the comment. Eleanor's been forcing vegetables on me, and the physical therapy helps with the stiffness. So I heard, Michael said with a smile. I'm impressed. Will snorted. Don't be. She practically dragged me to the first appointment. I did not, Eleanor objected, laughing. I merely suggested that a man who once ran a shipping empire shouldn't be afraid of a little exercise. Manipulation, pure and simple, Will said, but his eyes were twinkling. Michael watched this exchange with surprise and something like hope. Dad, while I'm here, I'd like to go through some of the rooms upstairs. The lawyers are updating the estate inventory and... Do whatever you need to, Will interrupted, surprising both Michael and Eleanor. Just stay out of the north wing. Sarah's studio remains private. Michael nodded, accepting this limitation. Of course. Thank you. He picked up his briefcase. I'll start in the library, if that's okay. Go ahead, Will agreed. Eleanor and I will be on the porch. It's too nice a day to be inside. After Michael headed upstairs, Eleanor wiped her hands and prepared to help Will to the porch. "You're in a good mood today," she observed. Will shrugged again. "The pain's not as bad. And—" He hesitated. "It's good to see Michael trying. He's making an effort." "So are you," Eleanor pointed out gently. "That matters too." Outside, the October air was crisp but pleasant, with just enough breeze to carry the salt scent of the ocean up to the house. Eleanor draped a light blanket over Will's legs and settled into the chair beside him. "Michael says James is considering retirement," Will said after a while. Eleanor nodded. "That's what he told me too." "Would you consider staying on? Permanently, I mean." Will kept his eyes on the horizon. "The house needs someone. The house needs someone." Eleanor felt a rush of warmth at his awkward invitation. "Michael already asked me." Will turned to her, surprised. "He did?" "Just now, in the kitchen. I told him I needed to think about it and that he should talk to you first." Will chuckled. "He always did try to take charge. Gets that from me, I suppose." His expression grew more serious. "But what do you think? Could you see yourself staying here?" Eleanor looked out at the view, considering. "I've grown fond of this place," she admitted. "And I've grown fond of you too, you stubborn old man." Will smiled at that. "High praise, coming from you." "I'd like to stay," Eleanor decided. "But only if we're clear on one thing. I work for you, not Michael. It's your house, your decisions." "Agreed," Will said promptly. "Though I should warn you, I plan to be much more active around here. The physical therapist thinks I might even manage short distances with a walker soon." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor exclaimed. "Don't get too excited," Will cautioned. "I'll still be mostly in this chair, but even a little independence would be—" He trailed off, emotion making his voice rough. Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand. "It would be a start." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching seagulls wheel over the cliffs below. Eventually, Eleanor spoke again. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you about," she said hesitantly. "Sarah's studio. You never talk about it, but I can tell it's important to you." Will's face closed off immediately. "It's private." "I understand that," Eleanor assured him. "But it seems like it's more than just wanting to preserve her space. Sometimes when you talk about it, you look afraid." Will was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "The day Sarah died, we argued about the studio. She'd been spending more and more time there, working on some new project she wouldn't tell me about. She was distant, distracted." He swallowed hard. "I accused her of hiding things from me. We'd never kept secrets before, not in 30 years of marriage." Eleanor waited, sensing there was more to the story. She left the house upset, driving too fast on the coastal road. Will's knuckles whitened on the armrests of his wheelchair. They said she likely died instantly when the car went over the edge. "I'm so sorry, Will," Eleanor said softly. "After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to go into the studio. Couldn't face whatever she'd been hiding from me." His eyes were distant with memory. "So I locked it up. All her paints, her canvases, whatever secret project she was working on, it's all still there, exactly as she left it." "Maybe it's time," Eleanor suggested gently. "After 15 years, maybe it's time to face it." Will shook his head firmly. "I can't." "You don't have to do it alone," Eleanor pressed. "I could go with you, or Michael." "No," Will interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "The studio stays locked. End of discussion." Eleanor nodded, accepting his decision for now. But she couldn't help wondering what Sarah could have been working on that still haunted Will all these years later. That evening, while Will was resting before dinner, Eleanor found Michael in the library, surrounded by stacks of papers and old photo albums. "Find anything interesting?" she asked. Michael looked up, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Family history mostly. Tax records, property deeds. He held up a leather-bound album. And pictures from when Dad and Mom first bought this place. It was a wreck back then. Eleanor sat across from him, glancing at the photos. Sarah transformed it. She did, Michael agreed. Mom could see potential in anything. He closed the album with a sigh. I asked Dad about the company papers, but he just signed them without even reading them. Said he trusts me to handle things. Isn't that good? It's not like him, Michael said, concerned. Dad built Morgan Shipping from nothing. He used to review every contract personally, no matter how minor. He shook his head. I'm worried he's giving up. I don't think so, Eleanor disagreed. I think he's finally allowing himself to let go of some things, to trust others. Maybe, Michael conceded. Speaking of trust, did he mention my job offer? Eleanor nodded. He did. Actually, he offered it himself, without knowing you'd already asked me. Michael smiled. And? I'm staying, she said simply. This place is starting to feel like home. I'm glad, Michael said, sounding genuinely relieved. Dad needs you. Eleanor stood to leave, then paused. Michael, what do you know about Sarah's studio? The locked room in the north wing? Michael's expression changed subtly. Not much. Dad sealed it off after she died. No one's been in there since. He told me they argued about it the day she died, Eleanor said carefully. That she was working on some project she wouldn't tell him about. Michael frowned. That doesn't sound like Mom. She and Dad shared everything. He thought for a moment. Although, the last few months before she died, she did seem preoccupied. I assumed it was about her health. Her health? Mom had headaches, severe ones. The doctors found a small aneurysm about 6 months before she died. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but they were monitoring it. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Dad was constantly worried, but Mom insisted on living normally. Said she wouldn't be treated like she was made of glass. Will never mentioned any of this, Eleanor said, surprised. He probably can't bear to, Michael replied. He was convinced she was pushing herself too hard with her art, that the stress would make the aneurysm worse. His expression darkened. Their argument that day? It was about her health, not secrets. Dad wanted her to rest, to stop working so much in the studio. Mom refused. Eleanor absorbed this new information. So the car accident was just that, an accident, Michael finished. But Dad has always blamed himself. He believes he caused it by upsetting her. That's why he can't face the studio, Eleanor realized. It's not about what might be in there. It's about guilt. Michael nodded sadly. 15 years of it. Before they could discuss it further, they heard Will calling from downstairs. Eleanor, Michael, is dinner ready soon? Coming, Eleanor called back. She gave Michael a meaningful look. We'll talk more later. Michael nodded, returning to his papers. But as Eleanor headed downstairs, she couldn't stop thinking about the locked studio and the secrets it might contain. Not Sarah's secrets, perhaps, but answers that might finally free Will from his prison of guilt. After dinner, when Will had retired to his room for the night, a new development that Eleanor considered a major victory over his habit of sleeping in his study, she found herself drawn to the north wing of the house. The corridor was dark and dusty, clearly unused for years. At the end was a door with a simple brass key still in the lock. Sarah's studio. Eleanor knew she shouldn't be there. She had promised Will she would respect his privacy, his rules. But something about the story didn't add up. If Sarah's project had been innocent, why would Will still be so afraid to face it after 15 years? As she stood hesitating in the hallway, Eleanor heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Michael watching her. Curious, he asked quietly. Concerned, Eleanor corrected. Will is finally starting to live again, but he'll never be truly free until he faces whatever's in that room. Michael stepped closer. I've wondered about it too, all these years. What was so important that Mom would risk her health to work on it? What was she hiding from Dad? They both looked at the door, at the key that hadn't turned in 15 years. We shouldn't, Eleanor said, but she made no move to leave. Probably not, Michael agreed. But if there's something in there that could help Dad. He reached for the key. Wait, Eleanor said, putting her hand on his arm. If we do this, we do it for the right reasons. Not curiosity, not secrets. Only if it might help Will find peace. Michael nodded solemnly. For Dad, he agreed. Together, they turned the key. The door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. Michael reached for a light switch on the wall, and after a moment's hesitation, soft light filled Sarah's studio. Eleanor gasped. The room was large, with tall, north-facing windows now covered by heavy curtains. Easels stood draped in cloth, and canvas-covered paintings lined the walls. A large wooden desk dominated one corner, its surface neat and organized as if Sarah had just stepped out for a moment and would return any second. It's exactly the same, Michael whispered, stepping inside. Like time stopped in here. Eleanor followed slowly, feeling like an intruder. We shouldn't stay long, she said. Just see if there's anything that might help Will. Michael nodded, moving toward the covered easels. Mom always kept her current projects here, he explained, reaching for the cloth covering the largest one. As he pulled the cover away, both Eleanor and Michael fell silent. The painting was striking, a portrait of Will, seated in his study with sunlight streaming through the window. In the painting, Will looked strong and vital, his face creased with laughter lines instead of pain. But what made Eleanor's heart skip was the date in the corner. 10/15/10. A date that would have been after Sarah's death. That's impossible, Michael said, shaking his head in confusion. She died in October of 2010, but this is dated. He trailed off, moving to the desk where a calendar still hung on the wall. Dad always said she died on October 12th, but... Eleanor scanned the desk, noticing a stack of letters neatly bundled with string. The top envelope was addressed to Will in Sarah's handwriting but had never been opened. Beside it lay a leather-bound journal, also marked with Sarah's name. "Michael," she called softly. "Look at this." Michael joined her at the desk, his face pale with shock. "Those are Mom's things. Her journal." He reached for it with trembling hands. "Should we?" Eleanor asked, uncertain. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "But we've come this far." He opened the journal to the last entry, dated October 15th, 2010, 3 days after Sarah supposedly died. Eleanor read over his shoulder, her confusion growing with each line. "Will won't answer my calls. 3 days now, and nothing but silence. I understand his anger. I kept too many secrets, convinced myself it was to protect him. But now I fear I've lost him forever. The doctor warns that stress worsens my condition, but how can I not be stressed when the man I love believes I betrayed him? Tomorrow I'll try once more to explain everything, to make him understand why I had to investigate the company's Pacific operations in secret. If he still turns me away, at least I'll know I tried. This portrait will be my final gift to him, the Will I've always seen, even when he couldn't see it himself." Michael turned to Eleanor, stunned. "Mom was alive after the accident? That's not possible. Dad identified her body." Eleanor's mind raced. Unless he didn't. Unless he only thought he did. She glanced around the studio with new understanding. Sarah was investigating something about Morgan Shipping's Pacific operations. Something she kept secret from Will. Michael nodded slowly. "Dad told you they argued the day she died. What if that argument was about her investigation, not her health? What if she tried to tell him what she'd discovered, and he refused to believe her? Then what happened to her?" Eleanor asked. "If she didn't die in that car accident..." Michael quickly flipped through the journal's earlier entries, scanning for clues. "Here," he said, stopping on a page from September. Mom writes about headaches getting worse. Doctor concerned about the aneurysm. He turned several more pages. And here, she mentions proof of illegal dumping at the Philippines facility, says she plans to confront Dad's business partner, Orion Fletcher. Orion Fletcher? Eleanor repeated. Will's mentioned him, said he took over daily operations after Will became wheelchair-bound. He's still running things, Michael confirmed. I report to him as Pacific Division Manager. His expression darkened as he continued reading. Mom suspected Fletcher was hiding environmental violations from Dad. She had evidence. Eleanor noticed a large manila envelope tucked beneath the journal. Inside were photographs of industrial waste being dumped into coastal waters, along with shipping manifests from Morgan shipping vessels and medical reports showing increased illness rates in nearby villages. This would have ruined the company, Michael said grimly, and Fletcher's career. So what really happened to Sarah? Eleanor asked, though she was beginning to fear she knew the answer. Michael collected the journal and evidence. I don't know for certain, but I need to show all of this to Dad. He deserves to know the truth, whatever it is. Eleanor hesitated. It will devastate him, Michael, finding out Sarah might not have died in an accident, that she might have been… She couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Michael agreed heavily, but 15 years of guilt and grief based on a lie? That's worse. Before they could discuss it further, they heard a sound that froze them both, the whir of Will's motorized wheelchair approaching in the hallway. He never comes to this wing, Michael whispered. He does now, came Will's voice from the doorway. Eleanor and Michael turned to find Will watching them, his face unreadable in the dim light. Will, Eleanor began. We can explain… No need, Will interrupted, wheeling himself into the studio. I saw the light under the door. Knew someone was in here. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the covered paintings, the desk, and finally the portrait of himself that Michael had uncovered. I've been working up the courage to come in here for weeks now. You have? Michael asked, surprised. Will nodded, moving closer to the portrait. Eleanor's been helping me face things I've been avoiding for years. This room was next on my list. He looked at the portrait with a mixture of pain and wonder. Sarah always saw the best in me. Eleanor approached Will cautiously. There's something you need to see, she said gently. Something we just found. Michael brought over the journal and the evidence envelope. Dad, Mom was investigating environmental violations at the Philippines facility. Fletcher was hiding them from you. Will didn't look surprised. I know, he said quietly. You know, Michael repeated incredulously. Will reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. Sarah left me a note the day of our argument. I was too angry to read it then. By the time I found it, I thought she was already gone. He unfolded the paper, revealing Sarah's handwriting. Will, if you're reading this, please call me. What I discovered at the Philippines plant is worse than I imagined. Fletcher threatened me when I confronted him. I'm afraid of what he might do. I love you. S. I found this 3 days after her accident. Will continued, his voice tight with old grief. By then, Fletcher had already brought me to identify a body so badly damaged that I could only recognize Sarah's jewelry and clothing. But the journal, Eleanor said, it's dated after the accident. She was alive, writing in this studio. Will nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I realized that too late. When I finally came to the studio looking for answers, it was empty. Cleaned out. This… He gestured around the room. This isn't how I left it. Someone's restored it exactly as it was. Michael looked confused. But if it wasn't like this when you last saw it, then who? Fletcher, Will interrupted. It had to be. He's the only one with the resources, the motive to keep me believing Sarah died in that accident. His hands gripped the wheels of his chair tightly. All these years, I thought my condition was just genetic bad luck combined with grief. But the timing, it started with mystery symptoms right after I found Sarah's note. "You think Fletcher poisoned you?" Eleanor asked, horrified. "I think he made sure I'd never be well enough to dig too deeply into what happened to Sarah," Will replied grimly. "Doctors could never explain why my condition progressed so rapidly." Michael looked stricken. "Dad, I've been working for this man for 10 years, reporting to him, trusting him. If what you're saying is true, then Fletcher is responsible for your mother's disappearance, my condition, and God knows what damage to those villages in the Philippines," Will finished. "And he's been running my company, using my name, for 15 years. The three of them sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "What do we do now?" Will looked at the portrait of himself one last time, then turned to face them with new determination in his eyes. "Now, we find the truth. All of it." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Will, with renewed purpose, threw himself into physical therapy with an intensity that surprised his doctors. Though still reliant on his wheelchair, he began using a walker for short distances, rebuilding strength that years of isolation had depleted. Michael took a leave of absence from Morgan Shipping, ostensibly to care for his father, but actually to conduct a quiet investigation into Orion Fletcher's activities. Using his position and access, he uncovered financial records showing millions diverted from environmental compliance funds into offshore accounts. Eleanor, meanwhile, ran the household and supported both men, maintaining a sense of normalcy while their world shifted beneath them. She became Will's confidant and Michael's sounding board, the steady center around which their investigation revolved. As November turned to December, they gathered in Will's study, now bright with sunlight through clean windows, to discuss what they'd discovered. "The evidence is overwhelming," Michael reported, spreading documents across Will's desk. "Fletcher not only covered up the dumping, he's been embezzling from the company for years. He's built an entire shadow operation." Will nodded grimly. "And Sarah?" Michael's expression tightened. "Still no concrete proof of what happened to her. But I found records of a Morgan shipping vessel that left the Philippines the day after Mom's accident, headed for a private island Fletcher owns in Indonesia. It wasn't on any official manifest." "Do you think she could still be alive?" Eleanor asked the question they'd all been avoiding. Will shook his head slowly. "After 15 years? With her medical condition? I don't think so." His voice was steady despite the pain in his eyes. "But that doesn't mean we can't still get justice for her." "I've contacted the FBI," Michael said. "They're already investigating Fletcher for financial crimes. When I showed them the environmental evidence and suggested a connection to Mom's disappearance, they agreed to expand their investigation." Will moved his wheelchair to the window, looking out at the winter ocean. "I should have listened to her that day," he said quietly. "If I hadn't been so stubborn, so quick to assume the worst." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known, Will." "I knew what kind of person she was," Will replied. "In 30 years of marriage, Sarah never did anything without a good reason. I should have trusted that." They were interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. Michael answered it, returning moments later with two serious-looking men in suits. "Mr. Morgan?" the taller one said, approaching Will. "I'm Special Agent Daniels with the FBI. We'd like to ask you some questions about Orion Fletcher and your late wife's investigation into Morgan Shipping's Pacific operations." As Will nodded and gestured for them to sit, Eleanor moved to leave the room. "Stay," Will said, catching her hand. "Please, I need you here for this." Eleanor squeezed his hand and sat beside him, ready to face whatever came next together. Spring came early to the Maine coast that year. By March, the gardens of Oakwood Manor were showing signs of new life, crocuses pushing through the soil, buds forming on long dormant trees. Inside, the house had transformed as well. Rooms long closed were opened and aired, furniture uncovered, life returning to spaces that had stood frozen in time for 15 years. In the dining room, Eleanor set the table for dinner while Will practiced with his walker, moving slowly but steadily around the room. "You're getting stronger every day," she observed with pride. Will smiled, something he did regularly now. "The doctors are calling it a miracle. I call it having something to live for again." The front door opened and Michael's voice called out, "Dad? Eleanor? I'm back." They met him in the hallway, where he stood holding a large cardboard box and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "What is it?" Will asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not exactly," Michael replied, "but the FBI found something when they raided Fletcher's island compound." He set the box down carefully. "Fletcher was arrested last week trying to flee the country. They've got him on financial fraud, environmental crimes, and now—" He paused, looking directly at his father. "Conspiracy to commit murder." Will's hands tightened on his walker. "Sarah?" Michael nodded. "They found evidence on the island. DNA that matches Mom's, journals, photographs. She was there, Dad. Fletcher took her there after staging the accident." "For how long?" Will asked, his voice barely audible. "At least a year," Michael said gently. "The aneurysm eventually— She didn't suffer long, according to the medical records they found." Will closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this confirmation of his worst fears. When he opened them again, they were clear and focused. "What's in the box?" Michael knelt to open it. "Her things. The FBI released them to us now that they've processed all the evidence." He began carefully removing items, sketchbooks, journals, a small wooden box of jewelry. "There's one more thing," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. "This was separate from the rest. It's addressed to you, Dad." He handed Will a sealed envelope, yellowed with age but preserved inside a plastic evidence bag. Will's name was written on it in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, Will opened the bag and extracted the letter. As he unfolded it, a small photograph fell out. Sarah on the beach of what must have been Fletcher's Island, looking thin but smiling at the camera. Will began to read aloud, his voice gaining strength with each word. "My dearest Will, if you're reading this, then somehow, against all odds, the truth has found its way to you. I've written so many letters that never reached you, but I keep trying, hoping that someday, somehow, one will. First, know that I love you, have always loved you, will always love you. What happened between us that last day breaks my heart. I should have told you about my investigation sooner, trusted you with the truth from the beginning. My silence was meant to protect you, but it only drove us apart when we needed each other most. Fletcher keeps telling me you believe I'm dead, that you've moved on. I don't believe him. I know you, Will Morgan. I know your heart. No matter what he's done, no matter what lies he's told, I believe that someday you'll discover the truth. My condition is worsening. The doctors here say the aneurysm could rupture any day. I may not live to see justice done, but I've documented everything. Someday Fletcher will pay for what he's done. To those villages, to our company, to us. Don't blame yourself, my love. Not for our argument, not for what came after. The only person to blame is Fletcher. He's the one who saw my investigation as a threat, who decided to remove me before I could expose him. If I could have one wish granted, it would be to see you again, to hold you one last time. Since that may not be possible, know that I die with you in my heart, with no regrets except the time we lost. Live, Will. Whatever happens, however this ends, promise me you'll live. Not just exist, truly live. Open the curtains, feel the sunshine, laugh again. Do it for me, for us, for the life we shared and the love that never died. Forever yours, Sarah." When Will finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. He carefully folded the letter and held it against his heart. "She knew," he said softly. "Even then, she knew we'd find the truth someday." Eleanor wiped her eyes. She never stopped believing in you. Will looked at the photograph of Sarah one more time, then tucked it and the letter safely into his pocket. Michael, help me to the studio, would you? There's something I need to do. Together they made their way to Sarah's studio, which had become a regular destination for Will in recent weeks. The room was no longer a shrine to the past, but a living space where Will often sat, surrounded by Sarah's art and memory. In the corner stood a new addition, an easel with a half-finished painting of the view from the porch. Will's project, begun with shaking hands but growing stronger with each session. Will moved to stand before Sarah's portrait of him, the one dated after her supposed death, the one that showed him as she had always seen him, strong, vital, filled with purpose. I made her a promise, Will said, looking at the portrait. To live, not just exist. He turned to Michael and Eleanor. I intend to keep it. Michael smiled through his tears. She would be proud of you, Dad. Of both of us, Will corrected him. We found the truth together. He reached for Eleanor's hand. All three of us. Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in his grip that hadn't been there 4 months ago when she first arrived at Oakwood Manor. What happens now? She asked. Will looked between her and Michael, the two people who had helped bring him back to life. Now, we go forward. Fletcher will face justice. The company will make things right with those villages in the Philippines. And he smiled, a genuine, full smile that transformed his face. We live, just as Sarah wanted. As the spring sunlight streamed through the studio windows, painting them all in golden light, Will Morgan stood straighter, leaning less heavily on his walker. The weight of 15 years of misplaced guilt had lifted from his shoulders. In its place was purpose, and something he had thought lost forever, hope. Eleanor watched him, this man who had been so broken when she first met him, now slowly rebuilding himself. She thought of the journey that had brought her to Oakwood Manor, the failed restaurant, the divorce, the desperate need for work that had led her to answer the agency's call for an emergency replacement. What had begun as a temporary job had become something else entirely. A home, a purpose, a family pieced together from broken parts but stronger for having been repaired. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of the ocean up to the house. In the gardens, new growth pushed through old soil, and inside Oakwood Manor, 3 people who had each been lost in their own way stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Not alone, but together. Just as Sarah would have wanted.